All right. Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to our session, our 11th session and the first session for 2023. This is ADB Circular Economy Webinar Series. And to start us off, I would like to introduce to you our moderator for today. He holds a Master's of Science in Chemical Engineering from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, is a chartered engineer in the United Kingdom, and a professional engineer of Queensland in Australia. Prior to ADB, our moderator worked as a Senior Investments Operations Specialist at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and as a Senior Water and Sanitation Specialist at the World Bank. A moderator for this session, Mr. Terry Cho, Senior Urban Development Specialist for Waste Management under the Urban Sector Group, Department of Sustainable Development and Climate Change. Back to you, Terry.
Thank you, Ice. So hi, everyone. I hope you see my screen working. So so thank you very much, everyone, to attend the first webinar of these circular economy sections in the 2023. Yeah, you're right. You are the first to come join us. So let me brief about this circular economy knowledge sharing and capacity building series. Is a planned series of the event as you have joined last year to raise the awareness and develop capacity for implementing solution to enable a circular economy solution for our member countries. So the objective of the program are decided to share the relevant and timely knowledge among the ADB staff and also our client developing member countries on the approaches and the solution to enable to transit from our current economy to a circular economy in this region. And also we decide to build the capacity on the foundation and relevant solution to implement the circular economy in our member countries. And the last but not the least, to facilitate the dialogue and actions between among different parties towards how to scale up the investment in the circular economy solutions. And we also like to take this chance to remind attendants that actually we already built this circular economy working group webinar series including to show, as you are attending this now, to showcase the technical solutions, new approaches and emergence issues and case studies. And also we will plan to develop the country-focused training on circular plastic economy as we go for the recent one we conduct at the TA workshop recently. Okay, let's us to welcome and introduce our speakers today. We are honorable to invite Mr. Sharon Sengers, who is the former investment bankers, position himself as a turned impact entrepreneur. Sherman has dedicated himself to developing a financially viable and scalable solution to the global plastic waste crisis and reducing the environmental damage and carbon footprint of the construction industry. He launched this firm called EcoBricks in Hong Kong as a 100% circular economy solution to waste plastic that will otherwise end up in landfill or the ocean. His vision is by turning the waste that seem to be worthless into high quality building materials. And his vision is to demonstrate the dividing line between the trash and the valuable commodity is simply innovation. Let us to welcome this servant, the passionate entrepreneur, and who is willing to move out of his comfort zone from a air conditioning nice office building as a investment banker into this hot kitchen and a hot factory to doing this kind of the EcoBrick in the one of the most expensive place in the world, Hong Kong. Welcome, Sharon, and you may start now. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, for the very kind introduction. So I will keep my presentation as short as possible to allow as much time as possible for questions. So allow me to share my screen so I can start with the presentation and then hopefully welcome any questions that you may have. I think I need to have my screen sharing enabled by the host if you could, please. Thank you. Hopefully you can all see my screen now. So before I go into talk about the EcoBricks solution, I wanted to frame the problem that we are looking to address. The magic number that we're all solving for in terms of sustainability is 0. And there's one 0 that we're all very familiar with, which is 0 carbon emissions. But there's a 0 that a lot of us are not very familiar with and gets much less press coverage, and that's actually 0 waste. And there's a common misconception that these two environmental challenges are separate and distinct, but they're very much interlinked and interdependent. Is put it simply, we cannot reach 0 carbon emissions if we do not address the waste problem. And in particular, there's one very well-known waste problem, which is plastic waste, which is what we focused on finding an innovative solution to, simply due to the fact that the amount of unrecycled plastic waste is prevalent in virtually every country across the world. And then when we look at the product we are manufacturing and we innovated, is linked to one of the biggest contributors to both the waste problem and also the carbon emission problem, and that is the built environment. We all spend the vast majority of our lives in or around buildings, whether it's our homes, our schools, universities, hospitals, restaurants. The level of urbanization is increasing and will continue to increase. And the built environment is the single biggest source of waste generation. All of our buildings, our lifestyles around these buildings generates the waste that we have to deal with. It's also a major contributor to carbon emissions, both in terms of the emissions that are emitted for the building, and then also during the lifespan of the buildings and their operation. Construction consumes the greatest amount of natural resources out of any industry on the planet, in excess of oil and gas and agriculture. And it's growing at an unprecedented rate. So these problems are being magnified. So the famous statistic that I'm sure we've all heard is 2 trillion square feet of new building stock will come into play between now and 2060. And every new building will generate waste during its construction and during its operation. So finding a solution to make the built environment more sustainable will have a very significant impact towards reaching our 0 waste and 0 carbon emission targets. And the problem is very intricate and complex when you dig beneath the surface. So we look at plastic waste as a waste crisis, but a crisis that a lot of people are familiar with is that of sand, in particular sand used for the manufacturing of concrete. It's the most consumed man-made material in the world, and sand is the most extracted natural resource in the world after water. And it's depleting at a rapid rate, far quicker than it's being replenished naturally. So just as the demand for sand, for concrete is increasing due to massive urbanization, population growth, the actual resources that we depend upon are decreasing. So finding sustainable long-term raw materials is essential. It's not a nice to have, to ensure that we can satisfy the demand for construction and building in the next few decades. Now, the solution that we have innovated, commercialized and rolled out in Hong Kong is a concrete solution, but it is more sustainable because we replaced natural virgin raw materials with local waste materials. But more importantly, we match or actually outperform conventional concrete. And that's a very key factor. It's not just because it's more sustainable, it performs as well or better than the conventional concrete products on the market. It's also a unique plastic waste solution because we can recycle plastic waste that no other recycler can. And actually, we work with all of the large waste managers and recyclers in Hong Kong to take waste that they've collected, but they cannot process or recycle. So we're actually additive to the existing ecosystem and infrastructure. We don't seek to compete with plastic waste that already has a solution, has a market for raw materials. We deal with the vast majority, and in Hong Kong, that's 89% of plastic waste collected that's not recycled. We deal with that, whilst the rest of the industry is dealing with the 11% that is currently recycled. And those statistics are largely the same the world over in terms of the percentage of waste plastic that is recycled versus those that are not recycled. Because of our circular economy model and our use of waste materials in place of natural raw materials, we reduce significantly the carbon footprint of the concrete product. And we've conducted a life cycle assessment under the ISO 14040 framework to quantify our savings versus a conventional concrete brick using conventional virgin raw materials. And we can reduce the carbon footprint up to 41% versus conventional concrete. So not only are we finding an outlet for plastic waste that would otherwise have no home or no solution, we're also making the world's most consumed man-made material more sustainable as well. And when we talk about the circular economy solution, which is obviously the focus of this webinar, it's important to fragment what circular economy means. It can mean different things and it has different components. With regards to our solution, we're a circular economy solution because we take local waste, we manufacture locally, and as Terry said, in one of the most costly real estate markets in the whole world, and we use those bricks for local projects. So that's one element of the circularity equation. But just as importantly, circularity of the product itself is just as important, and it's actually a largely forgotten part of the circularity journey. So producing a sustainable product is great. Producing a sustainable product that can be fully recycled at end of life is even better, and that's what we have done. So we can recycle, and we have certified this 100% of our bricks back into new bricks at their end of life. So that's a very important part of the way we look at circularity. It's not just the first part, it's what happens to that product at its end of life, and can it be recycled? And also importantly, we look at the circularity of the industry that we're serving. So going back to my previous point, the built environment generates huge quantities of waste, including plastic waste. And what we do with our partners, we collect waste from the buildings that our clients have built, and we use that as a raw material to make concrete products for their new buildings. So the customer themselves becomes circular, the industry itself then becomes circular as well. As I mentioned, we reduce the consumption of natural raw materials. That includes sand, that includes aggregates, and replace it with local waste materials. So the ecological harm that's caused from mass mining and extraction and transportation of heavy raw materials across very long distances is avoided. And quite uniquely compared to traditional recycling, our recycling of the plastic is 100% cold and clean. So we don't heat or melt or chemically treat the plastic, which means we use far less energy. There are no pollutants, effluents, chemical byproducts from our process at all. So the manufacturing process itself is also low energy and low emission in itself. And any waste generated, including our own bricks, again, can be recycled back into new bricks. So we can be zero waste from start to finish. And to quantify how much plastic, and this is, as I mentioned, plastic that would otherwise go to landfill, open dumps, incineration, or the natural environment, just one football pitch of EcoBricks paving can recycle the equivalent of 14.3 million plastic bottles. And it's difficult to imagine what that looks like, but if you stack them on top of each other, they'll be equivalent to almost 3,500 Burj Khalifas, one on top of another. So to summarize the key benefits of our solution, we reduce carbon emissions. That's great. That's a target that humanity needs to reach. We reduce waste to landfill, to incineration. We reduce harmful pollutants and emissions from melting and heating of plastic waste. We help protect the natural habitat by avoiding and reducing the possibility of plastics leaching into the environment as large components or increasingly microplastics, which are showing very direct negative impacts on the natural world's ability to actually act as a carbon sink. And in particular, on the next item, it's the impact of microplastics on the oceans, which we're only really discovering the true magnitude of. But it has been documented and shown that microplastics affect the ocean's ability to capture and sequester carbon dioxide, and that is the world's largest carbon sink. So if we inhibit the ability of the world's largest carbon sink to sequester carbon, we have a real problem on our hands in terms of fighting the emission battle. We reduce transportation, and by that we reduce pollution, use of fossil fuels in transporting very heavy raw materials and finished materials across great distances. And actually, I was recently in Dubai, where I visited the Burj Khalifa, and I was shocked to find out that sand to make the concrete for the Burj Khalifa was transported from Australia to Dubai. It's a staggering notion if you think about it, but the carbon footprint just of that transportation is massive once you start actually doing the calculations. We, as I mentioned, implement a circular economy, a multifaceted circular economy, which covers the raw materials, the product, and the industry itself. And we seek to help the local communities through our solution. That ranges from building and instilling trust in the recycling ecosystem. And there is a great deal of mistrust and lack of confidence from the public with regards to recycling and what actually gets recycled. So producing a product locally that's tangible, that they can see, feel, touch, and integrate into their local communities, their buildings, creates a tangible and important link between the communities who are critical in fighting the waste problem and solutions that they have confidence and belief in. This is just a quick snapshot of our 2 current products, and we're developing many more. But in terms of the strength of our concrete, it actually exceeds the equivalent conventional products, but we can reduce the carbon emissions from 19% in our higher strength brick, which uses 25% waste materials, up to 32% in our second generation brick, which uses 65% of its total materials from waste sources, and we're working on a version 3 which increases those numbers even further. If we look at the big picture, and why are these kind of solutions important? Why are they critical to the industry that we're serving? There are irreversible macro tailwinds that the industry is facing, which means that the future of the industry has to be more sustainable. It has to be more circular. It has to be lower waste. And that pressure is coming from multiple directions. And there are sticks as well as carrots to encourage the industry to transform its business model. I think everyone has heard about the level of investor activism, and BlackRock is probably the most prominent and well-known asset manager pressuring companies that it invests in to improve their metrics, improve their sustainability credentials and measurable outcomes. And that has a very direct, and coming from my background as an investment banker, I understand how much of an influence that has on companies, because it affects them in where it really hurts, and that's in the dollar terms. So there's a huge amount of pressure coming from the investment industry to push companies to do better. The industry itself is creating great incentives to become more sustainable, and industry accreditations and rankings such as LEEDs, Beams Plus here in Hong Kong have very direct, again, tangible and intangible benefits for the industry by allowing larger areas to be developed if it can be shown that those developments have lower carbon footprints. There are financial incentives in terms of green loans, green bonds, tax credits, and also tax levies, depending on which country you're looking at. So those provide very direct incentives to perform better. Reporting requirements are going to be probably one of the biggest influential factors. So obviously we're talking about the ISSB framework that will come in terms of sustainability related financial disclosures. Also the Task Force for Nature-Based Financial Disclosures, which receives a little less press than the ISSB. The stock exchanges themselves are implementing these standards or their own standards to force the biggest companies, who are also the biggest waste generators, the biggest sources of carbon emissions, to actually report and provide detailed disclosures on their entire Scope 3 value chain. There are very big ESG and environmental targets from government. So here in Hong Kong, we have a zero waste to landfill target by 2035, net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Dubai, where I was recently, has net zero carbon emissions by 2050, zero waste to landfill by 2030. These are very, very ambitious goals, and the corporate world is absolutely key to governments being able to meet their these objectives that they've set themselves. And again, consumer activism should not be overlooked. Consumers have a great deal of power. And if you look at marketing materials for virtually any product these days, it includes sustainability as a core element of it. So it's becoming a key to decision-making for consumers. I touched upon Scope 3. I think that poses a particular problem for the construction industry and the property development industry, because their supply chains historically have been very fragmented, very opaque. And even when we were doing our research here in Hong Kong and we asked the large developers where their building materials come from, they did not know. And if you take it a step further in terms of where do the raw materials for those building materials come from, it's even harder to have that data and visibility. So it's going to be a particular challenge for the building industry to move towards Scope 3 reporting, because the upstream and downstream elements of that are highly, highly complex when it comes to this particular sector. Actually, one point to touch upon there, that's in terms of Scope 3, that's where the circularity proposition is very powerful. the closer the product and the raw materials are in terms of supply chains, in terms of locality, the more transparency there is, the easier it is to get verified and auditable data from raw material to finished product to end of life. So circularity is not just a fluffy notion. It actually has very, very direct benefits in terms of Scope 3 reporting. And in terms of the size of the market, obviously touched upon how much building there will be. To quantify the demand for construction materials, you can see here it's going to be growing massively over the next few years, and Asia will comprise a lion's share of demand for construction materials. That means the problems I stated in terms of sand, in terms of the carbon footprint of concrete is going to be a very real problem for the Asia Pacific region, because it will see some of the largest increases in building stock, and that means the largest consumption of the building materials, and hence the largest consumption of the raw materials that form those. Embodied carbon is going to be the next big challenge for the building industry, and yeah, there have been great strides in reducing operational carbon, but not a great deal of progress towards reducing embodied carbon, because it is a far more complex problem linked to the Scope 3 comments I just made in terms of supply chains and raw materials. So as operational carbon is improved, embodied carbon is going to form at least 50% of the emissions from the construction industry for the rest of the next few decades. So the industry does have to find solutions to the raw materials and the finished products that they utilize to address and actually achieve the net zero targets that are being set. I can throw 1,000 different statistics on plastic waste at you. I won't do that. We all know it's a major problem. It's an environmental problem, it's an ecological problem, and it's a health problem. We all have microplastics in our bodies, increasingly in our blood. It's a very real problem. So dealing with plastic waste is important for the environment, but also for our own well-being and health as well as the natural environment. Just a couple of project references that we've completed here in Hong Kong. This was our first project that we completed actually just about 1 year ago in the Gold Coast development in Tuen Mun. We used 10,719 bricks to repave the waterfront promenade, and it's a relatively small area, but just in that small area we recycled 3.3 tons of mixed plastic that was derived from 339 old washing machines, and that plastic would otherwise have gone to Hong Kong's almost full landfills. So as we scale up our ability to recycle plastic waste that would otherwise be a landfill or environmental burden can be quite significant. This is a more creative project we did for a Christmas installation to promote sustainability and recycling. And very importantly, once the installation was dismantled, we actually took all of the bricks back and we will be reusing them or recycling them, which means there's zero waste generated from our contribution to that installation, whereas the vast majority of the other materials will be disposed of and ultimately end up in landfill. So I will stop there. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope there are some questions for me to answer.
Thank you, Shervin. Well, wow, this is very inspiring and passionate presentation, I would say. Now we have the first two questions. First question, more technical ways from Brian, who is our municipal engineer from the CDI team. He's asking whether the plastic component of the EcoBrick will affecting the curing time of the concrete itself, which is a very technical question.
No,
and then the second question, yeah.
That's right.
Maybe let me finish the second questions and then ask you to reply. And then the second question is from the Agatha, who is asking more like the sourcing of your material. because there may be a whether it's a question on whether you can complete with the PET recycler, or because the PET price is not that bad, so maybe you need to pay more for your source. So maybe Seven, maybe let's finish these two questions first, and then we see the next round of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So for the first question, it does not affect the curing time. So our bricks reach pretty much full strength within 28 days, which is the standard for conventional concrete. So no effect whatsoever in terms of the curing time. And as you saw, the strength of the bricks is very high. So our high strength pedestrian paver actually exceeds the vehicle strength requirements here in Hong Kong. On the second question, I'm very glad you asked that question. We don't want PET. We don't want food grade plastic because that already has a recycling solution. And in fact, when we are sent PET bottles, we actually collect them and send them to our partners at New Life Plastics, which is the joint venture recycling entity by Swire Coca-Cola in Hong Kong, who focus purely on food grade PET. So there is a large scale, highly advanced, highly effective recycling solution for food grade PET bottles. We, as I said, focus on the plastic waste that the recyclers already collect, already separate, but have no solution for either in terms of the mechanical ability or actually an end market for that type of plastic. Perfect example I'll give you is PVC. It's everyone's nightmare plastic. So there are very few recycling solutions for PVC across the whole world, and that includes Hong Kong. So we actually work with the largest government contracted waste management companies and the EPD department themselves to source and collect this plastic waste, which otherwise, if it did not come to us, would go to landfill. So we're not competing for rPET. That has a wonderful market. It has a wonderful price. It can be recycled very easily. We focus on the plastic which either have no demand, have no economic value, and would otherwise simply be a waste burden.
Seven, thank you. Yeah, you have very clearly answered the question, and then your EcoBricks in fact are focusing on a very well-positioned niche market. While we are waiting for the others questions, I have two questions I want to raise. First, I see that in your version number 2 of the product, you have to tag 65% of the replaced material. So that means I would presume that in addition to the plastic, you are using other waste material to replace the component in the brick itself, including cement or the sand or others. So can you share what kind of the waste material you are using, and then whether you have the problem to collect or sourcing this material from the local market, whether you need to cooperate with other sectors? And then the second question, more related to the enabling environment. So just as I mentioned, and also you have double reiterated, Hong Kong is a different place, just like Singapore maybe, or other big cities. Many construction actually are not driven by the public sector, but by the private sector. So there's so many very famous property market developers. So what kind of the incentive policy is important in order to convince them to use your products? Maybe you can share from your experience in Hong Kong, whether maybe any kind of the government policy or green building standard from your experience. Thank you.
Sure. So on your first question, yes, you're absolutely right. Our version 2 incorporates not just plastic waste, but also our own concrete waste. So we can, as I mentioned, we can recycle our own bricks back into new bricks. And what we did is crush down our own bricks and use them as a sand replacement. So our version 2 almost entirely eliminates natural sand, and our version 3 that we're working on will eliminate natural sand completely, which means all of the aggregate materials in our concrete will be sourced from waste. So we will use no natural virgin raw materials for aggregates whatsoever. So we started by focusing on the plastic waste problem. Once we achieved our key targets on that, we then looked at other waste components that we can incorporate, and that includes concrete waste and our own concrete waste in particular. We can incorporate glass waste as well. We've started testing with cement substitutes, locally sourced cement substitutes. That's quite an important point I want to stress in terms of cement alternatives. Our focus is on circularity. So there are readily available cement alternatives such as pulverized fly ash from coal power plants or granulated blast slag from steel mills. Hong Kong does not have those. So we could import those. We would then compromise our circularity. So what we do is focus on what is locally available. And that will vary from market to market. So our solution is to find alternatives for local waste, not rely on transporting waste across borders to satisfy our demands. So our circularity is very, very laser focused on what is locally available and can be locally utilized, hence solving the local problems. For your second question, I touched upon some of the key drivers for the industry adopting these kind of solutions. The financial ones matter, of course they do. They matter to everyone. So both in terms of investor activism, so companies fund themselves either through equity issuance or through debt issuance. The more demand there is for their equity or their debt, the lower the cost of capital for them. So it has a very direct and relevant dollar cost for them. Companies, especially in Hong Kong, the real estate developers are increasingly issuing green bonds and green loans, where the interest rate tied to that debt is linked to their key sustainability targets. So the more they reduce their carbon emissions, the more they reduce their waste, whatever the metrics in that instrument are, the lower the interest cost. And when you're issuing $1 billion of debt, even a 0.1% reduction in interest rate has a massive, massive dollar benefit to those companies. From the industry perspective itself, as I mentioned, Beams Plus here in Hong Kong is very important to the developers because if their project scores highly and ranks highly in the Beams Plus categories, they are given larger planning permission. They're allowed to build more square footage on the land. And again, that has real value in terms of the benefits that it brings to the developer. So they are very focused on scoring as highly as possible because that has a very direct translation into how much they can build. And if they can build more on the same plot of land, they generate more revenues and more profits from that.
Stephen, thank you for your very good response and very good comprehensive assessment of the market in Hong Kong. So we have received two more questions from Norway Sang and also Grassins. So they both concern asking about the price of your EcoBrick as compared to conventional brick. And as you know that we are targeting in the more developing member countries, so they may not have the deep pocket like your property developers customer. So these are very valid questions. And also, I think there's a new question. Just let me read from It's from Stefan. So he want to say first, he want to thank you for your excellent initiative and pioneering this. And then could you please share a few technical details on processing of the plastic? Maybe later on, maybe some pictures of your plant. Maybe we can discuss it later on when this is a very technical, very detailed questions. But maybe you can answer the more burning question on the cost, and maybe then you can share some of the technical details if it is allowable in this sections. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Of course, again, the cost question always comes up. I'm glad that was asked. So we actually price the same as conventional bricks here in Hong Kong. And we're very confident if we're able to do that in Hong Kong, where we have to pay some of the world's highest rental costs, some of the world's highest labor costs, some of the world's highest transportation costs, some of the world's highest fuel costs. We will be able to do that in many other countries where those costs are not as high. Obviously, the market dynamics in each country differs. From the countries that we've researched so far, we're highly confident our solution can be price competitive with conventional bricks in those local markets. Because if you think about it simply from a business model perspective, we are stripping out raw materials that we would have to pay for and actually replacing those with waste materials that we largely get for a low or no cost whatsoever, because they are unwanted wastes that would simply be sent to landfill, and a landfill levy would have to be paid by the waste generator. So we can be cost competitive, and we are cost competitive in Hong Kong, and we're very confident we can be cost competitive in most markets in Asia as well. And then I think in terms of the technical aspects, obviously, I'll keep it high level for now, but in terms of the technical aspects that we have satisfied and certified in Hong Kong, we've satisfied all of the general specifications for civil engineering works, which are the industry standards here in Hong Kong. They are amongst the most stringent standards in Asia. And not only have we met the minimum requirement, we've actually achieved grade A classification, which even for conventional concrete equivalents is quite hard to achieve, and not all manufacturers can achieve that. So we've achieved best in class classifications from a technical capacity, which covers compressive strength, abrasion resistance, water permeability, resistance, and dimensional deviation. I think there's another question asking what's needed for the business model to work in developing countries such as India, and every market differs very, very markedly. So the waste ecosystem of each market is very, very distinct from another. So if we look at Hong Kong versus India versus Indonesia, the types of plastics which are recycled or which are not recycled, the economics of the recycling industry differ greatly. Government subsidies differ greatly. Waste processing capabilities and capacity differ greatly. So what we focus on when we look at new markets is what plastic is already being dealt with, and what plastic is not being dealt with. What are the plastics that are a waste burden or an environmental burden because existing recyclers either do not recycle it or cannot recycle it economically. And again, if you just go back to the statistics, that is the vast majority of plastics in every country. The model will always be localized. It has to be localized because it's a local problem that we're sourcing. So the first thing we do when we look at any new market is what does the waste management and recycling ecosystem look like? Because actually the existing waste managers and recyclers are our partners. In Hong Kong, we do not compete with them, we work with them because we provide them an outlet for plastics that they have no solution for, which means they're able to take in more plastics because they're able to give the plastics that they don't want to us. So it benefits them because they can increase their throughput and generate more revenues from the plastics that they do want. because they have an outlet for the plastics that they do not want. So the existing recycling ecosystem is very much key to our business model, and we always look at what is being done on the ground in the markets that we look at.
Yeah, I see more question from Stefan Wine. By the way, he's our all-seasonal architect of our great team in East Asia. So that's the reason why he mentioned about so many questions on technical details, and even he want to persuade you to open your plant in People's Republic of China. But as you mentioned about, it really depends on the market itself. So you need to do analysis. And we suggest maybe we can have a offline discussion on his zero waste initiative. Actually, he's leading our zero waste initiative TA. Stefan, are you want to turn on your video and share some of your great initiative on the this kind of the green building and construction material? Seems you are really a big supporter on this. Stefan, are you willing to turn on your camera, or you want to have a offline discussion later?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for asking me, and yeah, thank you for putting me on the spot here, Terry. Thanks so much for this initiative. I think this is really fantastic, and to reduce sort of the load of the concrete and the bricks in the construction industry is really a fantastic initiative. Really much appreciated. Of course, we know that construction and demolition waste is a very big issue all over the world. We had a TA on this specifically in China with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development a few years ago, where we also pointed out a few opportunities, and then a few pilots have happened, for example, in the city of Shenzhen, just across the border from where you are in Hong Kong. And currently, as Terry mentioned, we have a TA ongoing that we call Circular Economy Zero Waste Cities, also in China. We have upstream activities in Qinghai province, where we look into resource mining, resource processing, and the opportunity to circularize that locally and reduce impact. So on the level of industrial symbiosis. Then we have a midstream component where we create a pilot together with NDRC. NDRC was the lead agency, where a pilot is being asked for, bidded out to reduce the waste from e-commerce, which of course has been rapidly growing before already the pandemic, of course, and of course exploded during the pandemic. And then we have a downstream component where we in Guangdong province also work with the housing department on classification of household waste, and then developing concepts for zero household waste management in the province, including hopefully a few policy recommendations to regulate the market, to allow private sector to come in, and then hopefully companies like yours would also be could also have an opportunity. I have a personal interest. That's the reason why I was asking this question. We're now preparing a project in the province of Shanxi, the one with 1A, Taiyuan is the capital, where we have, in fact, a private sector component through a financial intermediary, where somebody like you could be potentially take a loan from us to set up shop to promote that circular economy in a specific project. But also happy to discuss offline with you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be delighted. And we've been looking at, obviously, China is such a big market with multifaceted regions and dynamics. So we've started looking at the Greater Bay Area, obviously, because of the nexus between Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. We're actually working with Accenture at the moment to do a bit more of a deep dive into the market, understand it better, get some data points to figure out what an entry strategy would look like. So what you're describing is pretty much accelerating that process very much. So we'd be delighted to to look at these projects and initiatives, because for the way we view Hong Kong is that it's a validating platform for our expansion into mainland China. It's obviously a well-regarded real estate market. It has very stringent civil engineering standards and building codes. So proving it, validating it here, both with the large private companies and also with the government departments, we think will be highly beneficial when we then look to expand into mainland China as well.
Thank you.
I look forward to speaking soon, Stefan. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. So it's always a pleasure to have you to join this. Very having raised a very important questions. And then we have two more questions. One is from Stefan, not Stefan, which even Stefan from the PPFD. It's actually also a technical question. He wants to ask the lifetime of your actual brick products. And then we have a follow-up question from Brian, the same Brian of the CDIA team. We want to ask whether there's any incentive for your EcoBricks users to return the scrap or unused or either used or brick, maybe some damaged brick back to your company.
Yep. Two very good questions. So on the lifespan of a product, it will be the same as conventional concrete, and that's exactly what the civil engineering tests are designed to effectively predict by testing its strength and durability and weathering water resistance. So obviously our bricks have been in the ground for just over a year now, and as time goes on, they will prove themselves in the real environment. But again, the civil engineering tests that are required are effectively designed to ensure the bricks are strong enough and durable enough to withstand the same weathering effects, the same abrasion, the same load bearing as conventional concrete. For the second question regarding scrap, leftover, end of life products, absolutely. So what we're selling is not just a brick or an end product. We're selling a service on the front end, which means we are taking waste plastic directly from our customers, from their buildings. So instead of them putting into municipal waste, which will most likely go to landfill, they have a direct closed loop solution for that waste by sending it to us, and we transform it into bricks for their projects. That's the front end service. We then create a product in the middle that we sell them, and we will sell them a service that at the end of life of that product, so when they come to renovate the paving area and put new, hopefully EcoBricks in their place, instead of taking that waste, sending it to the public fills in Hong Kong, we will take that waste back from them and recycle that into aggregate for new bricks. How that benefits them, it saves them the cost of the landfill levy, and landfill levies are only going up. So again, using Dubai as an example, because I was there last week, the landfill levy went from 10 dirhams to 100 dirhams, a 10-fold increase, just like that. And it will only increase more as landfill space runs out. That space will become more and more expensive, and the levies will become more and more expensive. So it avoids the cost of the landfill levy for them. But what it does, very directly, again, referring back to the industry certifications and accreditations, under the Beams Plus, under LEEDs, there are points for recycling waste generated from your construction projects. So again, it will count towards getting them the highest possible point scores, the highest possible classifications, and again, the highest possible building permits and square footage of permits for their projects. So it has multiple benefits, and it's a service we offer. So we're offering a circular service, not just a one-time product.
Stephen, thank you. I think that's it's about to end now. That's and then we'll just like the final reminder. Thanks again for Stephen for your great question, and then we have more offline discussion. You can see there's many hands raised from our colleagues, and there's a potential application and replication in our living country, hopefully. And then these sections we will need to have a survey after that. And also all this material will be shared at our data room, which is open to all the ADB staff. And also, I think also can be accessed from the outside readers. So the details will be shared at the link at the chat box, and we also share the link for the data room latest. So thanks again for Trevor's the so passionate presentation. And then this is not, as I mentioned before, it's not easy for a investment banker move out from a air conditioning 5A style office building to the hot factory you are staying in, and then but in the meantime, it's always big reward, not only monetary wise but also to helping the circular economy building and then save the earth, not only for Hong Kong but hopefully China and also the rest of the world. Thank you again, Seven, and then
Thank you.
stay tuned for us. We have more excited sections. Hopefully, we can invite more presenters like Seven himself to present their new idea and brilliant idea or new challenge we are have for, and then we will always good to know we can find someone like Seven to bring to having a brainstorm section, and let us know there's always a solution out there. May not be within a ADB, but outside of the ADB in our member country and poor country, a wealthy country, or big city, or even otherwise. Thank you again. So
Thank you very much.
have
I
a
really
good
appreciate
day.
the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.